that's the thing. Like you said, we can dig it out of the ground. We can create things. Like as an example, there's an organisation called Sweet Atoms, and they're creating carbons using bio waste, using agricultural offtake, glassy carbons and things like that, which at the moment China owns and creates the majority of carbons in the world. But it's all good and well to create this, but what do you do with it when we don't have sovereign manufacturing? You mentioned earlier as well the big one, chips. If, as is expected, China forcibly take over Taiwan, or there's big issues for Australia. We'll know very quickly how much we rely on that particular type of hardware.
Yeah, and I'm probably a little bit more optimistic. I started the thinking around that in a more pessimistic view around, 2027,
Mm,
2035, the deadlines that, Xi Jinping has set for the army to be ready
mm.
for conflict, and then the army to be the PLC to be world class. I still think that that would not be a pathway that would be chosen, because of what we've seen happen with Hong Kong, and the actual implications that would effectively lead to. I'm a bit more optimistic on that front, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be prepared, and make sure that we have our sovereign supplies effectively managed properly.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that leads into things like, policies like adaptive procurement and trusted partnerships and friendshoring. They aim to balance openness with strategic resilience. Yeah, could you share, how that might influence tech and natural resource sectors?
Well, this is the thing. If most of the supply chain and the technology side depends on one player, and let's put this back into context. This is more than 50 years in the making. This is the rare earth strategy and electrification a little bit later on, but the rare earth strategy that China came to dominate today is the work that was incepted
Mm,
through Deng
mm,
Xiaoping. That's 50 years of work
mm.
with one party in power, effectively, and we're trying to catch up, because obviously, market power and market concentration are a bad thing. Other than some specific capitalists that will say,
Exactly.
unless you're
That's
winning,
right. That's right.
everyone else is
It's
losing.
only a reward if you're
But
not part of it, as they say.
exactly. So, but if you think about it this way, we have a lot of catching up to do. And the thing is, when we're talking about, um, reshoring capabilities and manufacturing to more allied countries, strategic supply chains, and being a bit more resilient in that sense, all of those make sense. But when you have no alternatives, you need the industries to be nascent again. You need more investment to come in, and that is a lot of money to catch up on a lot of um, uh, market power that's already been derived for the last 50 years. I'm not saying it's impossible, um, but it needs to be done. And so a lot of people at the moment, when you look at it, they're reacting to what's happening in the US, and they're seeing this as like, oh, the current leadership in the US is effectively doing X, Y, Z, and whatever. But when you look actually at what the result of that is, um, the US has eroded their manufacturing capacity over time, by no other reason than the fact that they're the world's major reserve currency. The Triffin dilemma plays full swing into that part. Effectively, if you are the world's major reserve currency, over time you will not be able to industrialize because other countries will come and produce things cheaper than you, and you will lose your industrial power over time. And this is what's happening. And the things that are happening in the US, um, at the moment, are trying to reverse that. And then the way they're being done, like, of course, like, people won't be happy with that. But I do think that this is what they're trying to do. Or if you read between the lines, this is what's trying to happen there. So what we need to do is to focus on working with our allies all over the world very, very closely to be able to bring industries that we were sort of left behind in, and reshore them back up, and do that very, very quickly.
Yeah, and it's as you sort of touched on earlier as well, and US being a democracy as well, like we operate in 3 or 4 year election cycles. It's very hard. You look at China as an example with their strategy. It's been a 50-year strategy, and they stay on song. And that's just due to their political system, obviously. So, um, Yeah, I look forward to getting some stability back in regional and local, um, I guess, manufacturing, but also, building, that resilient, local supply chain, efforts here as well. But, hopefully it can happen. I'm I don't know if I'm as optimistic as you though, mate.
Well, and it's look, yeah, maybe it's misguided optimism, but I would just I would like to think that there's better ways to resolve conflicts than wars, but the world at the moment is proving me wrong.
Uh,
So let's see how things unfold, and I think these are more long-term questions that we probably need to look at and see how they're unfolding. But yeah, at the moment, my optimism is being trampled. And I mean, we should not. I mean, being optimistic is one thing, but then we also have to be able to be prepared. Um, you know, uh, what's the saying? Hope for the best, prepare for the
that's right.
worst.
Yeah.
That's kind of thinking, yeah, we need to be prepared, and that's what we need to, and that will require a lot of public-private discussions and investments, which is happening actually.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and people are becoming more passionate about it too. Everyone I talk to every day, as well, Swaroop. I mean, everything's and I guess this is part of the thing. Like America has realised that, you know, or they're going through this um, thought process at the moment. Are we a global power or are we a regional power? It's hard to be both. Now we're obviously not, not in we're a small player, that requires allies like the US, to survive. Is in our current manner, but that's a whole nother discussion as well.
Yeah, and then but the thing is we're a middle power, and we need to play the role of a middle
Yeah.
power. I mean, we don't need to have and we need to live in the geographical context that we live in. Our neighbors are Asia and Southeast
Mm,
Asia. I mean, that's the reality we're living in. So we need to live within our geographical
mm,
context, and also within, the fact that we're a middle power, and we need to play the role of a middle power,
mm.
which I think is very, very important still. You don't only have to be the US or China to be able to provide, meaningful things to change the course of humanity. We still have a lot of things to do in the country and on global stage to be able to be meaningful.
100%, 100%. And mate, you mentioned earlier, Soft Iron and their local edge manufacturing and, supporting transparency and zero trust at the hardware level, and that's emerging. Yeah, could such models, do you think, apply to tools for, environmental data, natural capital, digital resource platforms?
So when we talk about zero trust, it fits specific application types. And when we're looking at, for example, IoT and environmental monitoring, those definitely will have some defense applications. Because, as part of defense, understanding terrain conditions and so on and so forth is like very, very critical. Um, in the country. But um, is it effectively required at every level of every solution that's built? I don't think so. I think that the zero trust is probably more on a cloud basis for very critical applications, like top secret clouds and things like that. I don't think they will have. I don't think they will have a very strong application in the environmental measurement space, other than some of those areas where defense will still need to be able to control very tightly.
Mm. And I guess, mate, talking about that intersection with, food, national security, and resources. So the strategic realignment of supply chains in Southeast Asia, from efficiency centric to adaptive resilient networks, it has implications for Australian industries. Do you reckon you could unpack that a little bit for us?
Well, this is what I said earlier in terms of we need to play in the geographical context that we live in, and we have a lot of friends in the Southeast Asian region. I mean, our prime ministers for a long time, the first visit they do officially to a foreign country is Indonesia, and they do that for good reason. And so what we need to be able to understand is what role are we going to play when these shifts are happening? And if you think that Australia has to be taking over the manufacturing of the world um, role, that's definitely not the role we need to play. But we have very advanced science. We have very advanced manufacturing capabilities and significant thinking that can help reshape some of the countries in the region, and we need to capitalize on those key strengths that we have, rather than trying to be everything to everyone.
Yeah, and you mentioned, when we talk about our neighbours, I think it was Paul Keating when he was Prime Minister said that, Asia's no longer the place we fly over just to get to Europe. They're on our doorstep and, we need to take that into consideration, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah, and the Southeast Asia is one of the fastest growing regions in the world, and when you look at not just from a population perspective, but from an economic prosperity perspective, I mean, if you think about it, uh, in the early years, and this is probably before I was born, there was a lot of students coming to Australia from Singapore, and what that does, it creates ties between the two countries. And then when you go to Singapore, you have significant people that were studying here that have a very soft spot for Australia. And so if these people are in finance and so on and so forth, it creates further ties. And they want to be, well, we can invest in Australia, or we can help Australia expand into Southeast Australian companies expand into Southeast Asia. And I think this is the critical ingredient that we need. We need to look at the region, and we need to work better within the region that we're living in, so that we can effectively bring growth and bring innovation and growth to that, as well as benefit from it.
Yeah, right. That's really important. And mate, talking about, I guess the regional and sovereignty piece. Australia's pushed to rebuild that capability. In the defence space, for example, Drone Shield's AI-driven counter drone solutions, and we've seen their share price go through the roof the last few days as well. And that's using largely local production, and then you got the likes of Naya and Ares Armaments who are building domestic guided weapons and other types of local, products like that. That local facilities and productions ramping up. What lessons do you think might be transferable to other sectors like, agriculture or the resources supply chain?
Well, anything that's critical to the prosperity of Australia needs to have a very solid Australian sovereign capability. And you mentioned defense organizations, and that's the same for anything else. If we think our food production today is dependent on grains that are controlled by 4 companies globally, we need to bring sovereign capability to everything that's critical to the country, and it needs to be done in a way that government facilitates investments, and innovators and entrepreneurs effectively pick that up and do that for every sector, not just natural capital, but defense, natural capital, all of the sectors, because things that are critical to us, if we depend on anyone else in a world that's changing rapidly, we're going to struggle. We're going to struggle, and we're going to be tributary when in some cases we don't want to be tributary. We want to be sovereign.
Yeah, it's interesting, mate. The Indian government, namely their defence, the Indian Armed Forces, they've highlighted and identified 491 items of significant importance that they need to address using sovereign capability, sovereign manufacturing, bringing it all back in house, and that's everything from engines to coatings for ships or submarines that they currently get from overseas. And they're going through a whole program at the moment where they're approaching the likes of, as an example, I'm just going to say, I don't know if it's exactly them, but just say it's John Deere or Hastings Deering or one of those organisations who craft agricultural machinery and there's similar applications that they could use for defence. But what they want to do is own the IP. Now, of course, those organisations aren't giving up any IP, but there's certain elements in the supply chain that they're allowing the Indian government and Indian Defence to own the IP in. But that's a long-term play for them as well. That's gonna take, it's that 50-year piece, right? Um, real
Yeah, and in that case, in the case of India, obviously there's the IP question, but there's also the manufacturing capability
mm,
question. So they understand that they have a heavy industrial presence, that China is going to transform from being, the world's manufacturer of everything to more specialized manufacturing, which will leave room for other players in the region and globally to be able to capitalize on. But the question is, is this like a model Australia needs to look at and try to replicate? And I mean, I don't think so. I think critical manufacture of things that are extremely important to the country, yes, but not everything. Not everything, because you can't compete on unit economics, and that's a problem. And so it might create misguided investments and things like that inefficient deployment of capital,
Mm.
which no one likes, nor government nor private institutions. So I just think we need to focus on our
Mm.
strengths and identify clearly these are the things that we're going to do,
Yeah.
and we're going to be the best at it.
Mm.
And we can't be everything to everyone. That's just not possible. And we don't have we'll never have the unit economics to match economies like India and China and Vietnam
Mm.
and a lot of the Southeast Asian countries that are going to either are or going to be manufacturing powerhouses.
Mm.
But we don't need. I mean, we should not abandon our industrialization efforts. Actually, not at all. We should just focus them on the critical parts. I mean, you imagine if we're no longer able to produce steel in the country, that's a disaster. You know what I mean? That's right.
Well,
So
we're
so
nearly there, mate. That's the problem, right?
exactly. So, but the
Mm.
Whyalla bailout, like I mean, clearly highlighted that the government was on the money and understood that the critical importance of it. But we're facing an eroding manufacturing baseline, but we need to really focus on the areas that we will be really critical at. And I think, robotics, and there's a few things that we'll be really, really good at. I mean, we've got some of the brightest minds in the world here,
Yeah.
but we really need to focus on the things that we're good at.
Yeah.
And it's the same, we talk about startups. That's what they do. You have limited capital, limited resources and people. You have to be really good at that stage and doing what you do better than anyone else. And that apply I mean, that thinking should apply to the areas our government should look at investing in.
Yeah. No, mate,
And
100%. Well, we play in that space with Sprint Venture Capital and in that startup VC space. And it's an organisation I'm involved in, and I think we're backing about 19 startup companies and at various stages of, startup and, that early venture piece. But you should see some of the businesses and ideas that have come across the desk of the team there. And even in the broader community, like looking at, you know, um, one of the brightest minds I've come across, Billy Jeremienko of Aquila. He is this fellow with his team. He's young. He's from Brisbane. He had this idea about how can we make continuous charging, laser charging for drones, so that drones can keep doing what they need to do, from a monitoring, surveillance, delivery point of view. But his vision wasn't just for about let's keep drones flying. His vision is about, and I mentioned the term earlier, is about ending energy poverty. So where you can take, you look at Mike Cannon Brooks with his power cable idea to Singapore. Well, there's a lot of problems with that. Billy's got this idea to be able to, beam a laser to a satellite in space, turn that satellite around so you can redirect that power to PNG as an example. That's
yeah.
amazing thinking,
I mean, exactly, and that's you need people like that have the vision, the intellectual capability to be able to make us a
Yeah,
powerhouse.
yeah, and people to take
Um,
risks, and I mentioned earlier, Dave Fraser from RZ Resources, he's a critical mineral miner here in Australia. People thought he was crazy 12 years ago. Here he is sleeping in a bloody in a bivouac out in the middle of WA and then in New South Wales, and he's done it all himself. He's raised the capital. He's now got this amazing resource that is now in such high demand, and people
yeah,
thought he was nuts. And that gets us back to Swaroop thinking about, well, what is it that is, we can't be everything to everyone, but critical minerals, renewable energy strength. There's talk of building like an Industry 4.0 style regional value chain and even a Southern Hemisphere AI hub. I mean, How do you think that, this intersection of energy resources, which we're good at, and AI, which is developing, how could it reshape regional collaboration?
Well, uh, if we take into account that in the critical mineral space there is a race and we're behind, that is definitely an area that we need to be playing in, and we need to be playing with our partners to be able to de-risk the current concentration that we have, so that it benefits not just us, but like if we think about the US and our dependency on those rare earths. I mean, Europe is even worse. So Europe is in an even worse position. So these are the things we need to be able to focus on. We've got trading partners that are historic trading partners, and we should keep doing business with them. But we have also opportunities to be able to bring new trading partners to the table. There was this whole deal around working with the EU and working with other countries around the world. So we should be bringing our strengths in this spirit, to help our economy grow and to reduce the risk and increase the resilience that we have in our supply
Mm,
chains. And that looks at what investments and areas that we can look at. And for me, AI obviously clearly is a very important aspect. And I speak to some people that actually absolutely hate it, and really smart, technologically advanced people that they don't want to hear about it. But the truth of the matter is we definitely need to, because otherwise we're going to be left behind again. And then robotics, and the intersection of AI and robotics, which is a very interesting move, which seems to be what OpenAI is doing, when they've hired um, a few critical people that were designing devices for Apple and so on and so forth.
mm.
So we probably need to be at the intersection of AI, robotics, and then very targeted manufacturing capability. Uh, and to me, these are the probably the three areas that we need to look at, and taking into account that whenever we do something, we need to take into account what the long term risk is, and specifically from a natural capital perspective.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, we've got this amazing, habit of being able to, dig up and export all of our natural resources as an example and make other people wealthy. I was talking to someone the other day who said, we Australia should have been smarter and been a lot like the UAE, where everyone has a free house and everyone has free education. Everyone has, you know, in the fact that, not necessarily being socialist, but the fact that we've got all this wealth and we're giving everyone else the opportunity. We've never taken advantage of that, ability to round out the supply chain and value chain of those products. Now, there's a number of reasons why, obviously, but I wonder if there's an opportunity to do something similar with current tech capabilities around our strengths. If there's a way to really make this a long term. Um, Viable alternative for Australia to create sovereignty and something that's really stands out in the region.
Yeah, and capital will play a key part in that,
Yeah.
private capital and public capital both. And we can't have enough of either of those. And the thing is, we punch so much more above our weight than anyone else when it comes to like deployment of money with success, from a number of unicorns perspective
Mhm.
to the number of companies that are started. And there's a lot of reports that highlight how well we do, how well we manage that capital, how successful the companies that we're creating are, in the country. And so if something's working and your only bottleneck is
Mm.
money, well, then let's try and find a way to bring more capital into the
Yeah.
market and do more of the things that will make us more resilient in the
Yeah. I
future.
mean, I know for a fact there's a lot of European money looking to find a home in Australia at the moment. They're all seeing Australia as a safe place to invest, and there's a lot of big old family wealth in Europe looking to deploy down here. So hopefully, our startups and those who are a little bit more down the track are well placed to help relieve those people of their capital.
And actually provide them return.
Exactly, 100%, mate, 100%. Yeah, no one's here for practice. We're all here for the big game, and especially those people who are very sophisticated investors. Mate, looking ahead, what are the one or two strategies, policies, technologies, partnerships that excite you the most in ensuring digital resilience, sovereign supply chains in Australia and the region?
I think one of the things I'm really interested in working out is what's gonna happen after this productivity commission and, the focus on growth and, measuring what matters. Digital has a key part to play in that. Artificial intelligence has a key part to play in that. So what's gonna come of that summit that happened, I think, about 2 weeks ago or something like that? And how are those priorities that the government's putting together effectively come into concrete action into building the industries of the future, that needed to start yesterday.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's something I really wanna keep an eye out on to see what effectively happens. Um, and then, I mean, my personal interest is in understanding how geopolitical situations will unfold over time. So, we're not, it's not a fantasy league of who's gonna
Yeah.
win, but basically keeping an understanding of, like, where are we in the world, how things are changing, and that obviously keeping the finger on the pulse to be able to understand what implications that will have for us long term. Because, if there are more conflicts and we get sort of embroiled in a conflict, our life here will change,
Mhm.
and we need to be prepared for that. But again, as I said, being optimistic, prepared for the worst.
Yeah, yeah, or as we say at Vaxa, be ready for today, prepared for tomorrow. Swaroop, look, in closing out today, if listeners could take away one big insight from our discussion, what would you hope it is?
I think one of the things we obviously all need to keep in mind is how do we effectively bridge the gap that we have between the current state and what the future state is. And every single person that's listening will have a key role to play, whether they work for government or whether they actually work in the private sector. And understanding how they can unclog the machine so that we can go faster in enabling supply chain resilience is something I think I'd like the people to ponder over.
Wow, mate, I have thoroughly enjoyed our chat today. One of the biggest brains I've spoken with. I often, was wondering through our chat if it's really you or an AI bot. I really have enjoyed our time together today, and I'd love to catch up with you again soon and talk about other matters of importance. Especially as you said, we're moving into this time of uncertainty, and there's a lot of moving parts. And, like you said, everyone needs to be prepared. I hope for the best, prepare for the worst, but let's get a bit more optimistic.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, when you're in Canberra, let's catch up.
100%, mate. 100%. Thanks, buddy. You've been listening to the Vaxa Bureau Intelligence Optimised podcast. Our vision is a legacy of advancing individuals, organisations, and the Indo-Pacific. We help business and government leaders advance their careers, organisations, and sectors by providing access to credible intelligence and secure, innovative products. Leadership may be solitary, but the future of leadership is coactive intelligence. Thanks for joining us today, and until next time, be ready for today and prepared for tomorrow.